Penguin Random House Audio presents The Perfect Horse, the daring U.S. mission to rescue the priceless stallions kidnapped by the Nazis, by Elizabeth Letts. Read for you by Paul Boehmer. Courage is being scared to death, and saddling up anyway. John Wayne. Central Europe, 1938. Prologue. Bombardment. Vienna, Austria, September 10th, 1944. A shrill air raid signal pierced the quiet of the cobblestoned Michaelerplatz, a plaza in the heart of central Vienna. A moment later, the grand Baroque edifices ringing the square shuddered in violent reverberation. Vienna was under siege. On the grounds of the Hofburg Palace, tucked away from view in the ornate stables that once belonged to an emperor, 33 majestic white stallions startled, pawing and rearing, their eyes white-rimmed with fear. Peering out of a box stall, one 8-year-old Lipizzaner stood perfectly still, his white coat glowing in the stable's dim light. His ears pricked forward as he tried to pick out the soft tread of his master's footsteps through the sound of airplanes roaring overhead. Next to his stall, on a small black slate, his name, Neapolitano Africa, and his birth date, 1935, were neatly stenciled in white paint. A moment later, a slim, middle-aged gentleman rushed to Africa's side, whispering a word of reassurance, then placing a warm hand on the stallion's shoulder. Alois Podhayski was utterly concentrated on a single goal, to keep his stallions safe. With a deft motion, Podhayski slipped the polished leather halter from its peg next to the stall. The stallion lowered his head and placed his speckled muzzle through the leather noseband, helping to make the task easier. His eyes seemed to say, "I know what's going on here. Let me help." By now, the entire stable, with its marble water basins and neatly hung tack, its wide aisles and airy stalls, was a hive of activity. Grooms in gray uniforms quickly haltered some of the stallions, while riders, in their buckskin breeches and jackets, took charge of others. Around them, bits of plaster broke free and powdery residue sifted down like snow. In single file, the horses and men crossed a large courtyard, passed through heavy iron-studded wooden doors, and then clattered across a city street, now deserted. The horses filed through a second set of doors and into a sheltered hallway. The stallions had calmed and didn't shy or balk, even as the loud booms and crashes almost drowned out the ringing of their iron shoes on the cobblestones. The last to enter the shelter of the hallway was Alois Podhayski, Olympic bronze medal winner and director of the Spanish Riding School of Vienna. The enormous wooden doors swung shut behind them. Here, the thick walls muffled the sounds a little bit. For the first moment since hearing the air raid signal, Podhayski took a deep breath. He reached into the leather pouch at his hip, extracted a sugar lump, and offered it to Africa, feeling the tickle of the horse's whiskers as he lipped it up from Podhayski's bare palm. Horse and man were clearly intimate, and seemed to converse without words, the man promising protection, and the horse evidently comforted by his silent reassurance. The Spanish Riding School of Vienna was one of Austria's most beloved institutions. Named for the Spanish provenance of the original horses, the school famously showcased the finest specimens of the equine species' most rarefied breed, the Royal Lipizzaner. as priceless as any of the masterpieces that hung in Vienna's museums, from their snow-white coats to their large, aristocratic heads and deep brown eyes. The horses were unlike any others in the world. The horses and masters, huddled here, were at the center of a maelstrom. Around them, war raged in all directions. These royal horses had escaped danger on numerous previous occasions, fleeing for their lives and safety from the armies of Napoleon, and again during the Great War. Each time they had been able to find safe haven. But now, in the all-out war of air and ground that was engulfing Europe, where could they go? No obvious path to safety lay before them. A loud boom ripped through the building. Next came a deafening thud. Glass shattered high above them. A cacophony of terrified neighs tore through the dust-choked air. Podhajski and Africa turned to look at each other. Podhajski gripped the sturdy lead rope, held his breath, and waited. Part 1. The Europeans. Equestrian art, perhaps more than any other, is closely related to the wisdom of life. Alois Podhajski. 8 years earlier. 1. An unlikely Olympian. Berlin, Germany, 1936. Alois Podhajski wore the cares of the world on his narrow, melancholy face. His gaze was like a poet's, directed inward. His oeuvre was the art of classical dressage. His verses danced on 4 legs. Podhajski looked as if he'd been born to sit astride a horse. His long, straight torso had no awkward angles, no rounded curves, nothing to detract from its elegant lines. But to look at the Austrian officer's forlorn expression was to understand that within he carried a shadow. In 1918, after being severely wounded in the neck while serving in the trenches in Flanders, he had suffered from shell shock. His love for horses had brought him slowly back, but the deep stillness of a defeated warrior never left him. On June 12, 1936, Alois Podhajski sat astride his mount, Nero, ready to enter the rectangular dressage arena that had been set out with meticulous precision on May Field, a 28-acre lawn just to the east of the Olympic Stadium. It was the site of the Olympic competition in equestrian dressage. The fact that this pair was competing here in the 11th Olympic Games against the top equestrian contenders from around the world was unlikely indeed. Nero, a gangly brown thoroughbred, had been bred to race, but having proven slow, he had been cast off for use as an army cavalry mount. The gelding had shown equally little talent as a soldier's charger, and the army had nearly sold him off before Podhajski decided that the horse showed potential and saved him from the auction block. Podhajski, too, was an almost reject, kicked out of Austria's prestigious cavalry officer training school after a back injury made him unable to bend at the waist, forcing him to abandon his first love, jumping. Unwilling to give up his passion, he kept riding even though he had to be lifted onto his horse. He would never forget the day, in 1928, during a cavalry school lesson, when his riding instructor scrutinized Podhajski's stiff form in the saddle and said, "You're finished." But Podhajski had pressed on, working with his reject mount, dedicating his energy to the art of dressage. Just 3 years later, Podhajski had received the Austrian cavalry's highest honor. In 1931, he was sent to study for 2 years at the world's oldest academy of classical.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?